Hello, welcome to the General Session 3, which is a mixed collection of presentations. And I'm your moderator. I'm Shelley James. I'm based out of Perth, Western Australia. So early here, late over there. Welcome. My helper for this session is Sean Tudor, who's up in Canada. So thank you, Sean. And I'd also like to thank Amanda, Talia, Mariana, Andy, and Deb, who are all in the background helping us out here, making sure everything's going to run smoothly and correct all of my mistakes. So I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians throughout Western Australia and their continuing connection to the land, waters, and community, and pay my respects to all members of traditional communities across the globe, to their cultures, their elders, past, present, and emerging. So this session is going to be recorded for later viewing, and it will be available on the SPNHC YouTube. We'll let you know when those recordings are available. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for our speakers. Each presenter, you'll have 10 to 12 minutes and some question time, and then we'll a little bit of time for transitioning between presenters. So for all of you out there attending, there's 160 of you. If you have any questions, there's a question and answer featured down at the bottom of your screen. And so feel free to type questions in as they come in, and we'll answer those at the end. And then there's also the chat at the bottom of the screen. So if you want to, make comments or chat with each other, feel free. But please be aware that that to use this judiciously, as any nefarious or inappropriate use of the chat, which goes against our code of conduct, which we should have all read, then we may lock you out of that feature. So be nice. All right, please bear with us if we have any technical difficulties, and enjoy the session. We currently have, yes, 160 attendees. And first up, we have Peter Giere. That was a miracle. Speaking about ABS implementation, the Museum for, this is where I'm going to get it wrong, Naturkunde Berlin and its collection database. Take it away, Peter.
Thank you. Just you need to enable my sharing the screen.
Okay, let's get that going here. I think.
Nope. I have a question. Is Sean sharing the screens?
No, Peter is giving his own presentation, so we may need
okay, so I'm going to have to make you a co-host.
Thank you.
You should be able to share your screen now.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you very much for the introduction and for pronouncing my name correctly, I should say. Now, this presentation is on ABS, and all of us know that ABS has been around for a long time. Still, I feel that we need to have some background on it, and so I would like to give you some information on the coming of ABS. ABS stands for Access and Benefit Sharing, and it is the content of the Nagoya Protocol. I think most of you are aware of that. But the Nagoya Protocol itself is part of another convention. That's the Convention of the Biological Diversity, which came into effect in 1993. And it is an international agreement that, that follows three aims, which is the protection of biological diversity, biodiversity research, to promote biodiversity research, and also to introduce fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of biodiversity. And this is where ABS comes into play again. The Nagoya Protocol is based on this, on the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization. So the underlying idea is that genetic resources are owned by the respective country, and that access and utilization require the sharing of the benefits arising from that. This is an illustration that goes along. So you have a country of origin where you access the genetic resources, and in exchange for that, the user who utilizes these genetic resources has to share the benefits arising from them. The original intention, of course, is a measure against biopiracy, but it covers also research. Now, the Nagoya Protocol came into effect internationally on October 12th, 2014. And that is a date you might want to remember because later actions rely on whether it was before or after the date that you accessed the material. The EU regulation, which is good for the EU, came into effect on the same date, and it also had a direct effect on all member states of the EU. So it was directly in place in Germany as well. So the German law, which implemented it in Germany, had some time, and it only came into effect on July 1st, 2016. Now, we need to clarify a few terms here. One is genetic resources, and that is any form of material of plant, animal, or microbial origin that contains functional units of heredity. And so basically, it is anything that contains DNA. We have access, that is the acquisition of a genetic resource, for instance, if you collect it in the field. And then we also have utilization, which can be translated into research and development with these genetic resources. Excuse my typo there. And also with their biochemical makeup. Originally, and this is also still in place, that traditional knowledge associated with these genetic resources is also part of the Nagoya Protocol. However, for the implementation here, I will leave it out of sight here. So we have access and we have benefit sharing, and these are interlinked by contracts, so agreements like PIC and MAT, and these are required by the compliance part of ABS, and that is where regulations come into play. That is, we have the EU regulation there, we have a German law on that, and this is also where institutional procedures start. And so your institution wants you to comply with all these requirements, and so our museum also came up with these guidelines for ABS, and we introduced definitions of procedures and responsibilities. We introduced some checkpoints, and we also devised an electronic ABS file repository, and that has an integration into Specify. We also came up with some accompanying rules, e.g. who is able to sign a contract and who is, for instance, MAT. And then we also came up with 2 flowcharts, one generalized one, which I will show you, and one specialized one, which has all the different steps in it, which are required by the system in our museum. And all of this is based on the CTF Code of Conduct, along with its MTA templates. And if you don't know it, this is where you can download it from the internet. Now, if we look at institutional activities, they may be manifold. They may have maybe field collection, they may be the reception of material, and also maybe just research with genetic materials in your institution. And if you have that, and if you do, if you want to find out whether your material is under ABS or falls under ABS, you want to check whether the collection of the material was after the 12th of October 2014. If not, it does not fall under the EU regulation. If it was collected after October 12th, 2014, you want to check whether the providing country has ratified the Nagoya Protocol. So this block is on the requirements according to the national law of the providing country. And if no ratification took place, it falls out of the scope there. And if yes, it means that you also have to check whether the material, whether the national law has an access, whether there's a national law regulating access. And if no, again, it falls out. And if yes, you might fall into the EU regulation. But if this, another requirement for the EU regulation is that the utilization takes place within the EU. So at your institution or at any other place within the EU. If not, you're out of the side of the EU regulation, that is. You also have to consider the requirements by the national law. So now once you answer yes there, you're in the EU requirements, and then you have to comply with the ABS measures according to the EU regulations. And these include due diligence, and for that you need your access and benefit, your access permit, or which can be PIC or MAT, and also you have to verify whether your research is funded by third parties. If so, you are in, and if not, there are no restrictions according to the EU law. If you're in, you have to declare due diligence, and there's a declaration form for that. But still, all of these will need to check whether there are any further contractual obligations towards the providing country, and if not, there are no further requirements. But if there are, you also have to comply with these contractual obligations. Right, so for all of these, you will have some emails, some documents, maybe even some contracts, and it is compulsory according to EU law to keep all these documentation for later inspection, and so you have to devise a system and how to deal with that. And so we came up with a shopping basket basically, and this is where we store our documents, and we call them a briefcase. And we have for each set of objects, we have a briefcase, and we store this in a database, which is the MFN hub for access and benefit sharing. So this is the data part of it. And that relates to specify. And you might wonder why we don't put it into specify directly. These are two different things in a way, because you need to, well, for one thing, you may have documents which don't have an object yet, so you can't put them in specify. And there are a number of other reasons as well, which we may discuss later. Right, so we have this MFN hub, and we can put all sorts of data in there, all sorts of metadata. So the collection object data, we can put in documents, we can put in process metadata, other data, and even more. So this is a tool to link the relevant information regarding access and benefit sharing to the objects in the object database in Specify. And this is a customized this is a customized module which is based on the DINA generic data module. So you can modify it in which way ever you want it, and you can put up new ABS cases there. You can list metadata for existing ABS briefcases. This would be a test one here. You can find existing ABS briefcases with the ABS number, which is relevant for your internal documentation. And you can link documents from other systems to the ABS briefcase, add any kind of document there. So it's very versatile. And if you create a new ABS briefcase, you will be supplied with an ID with a number there. And the date will also be created automatically. And this is then set, and all the documents relating to it will be part of this set. You can also track the status of your workflow over time, because It may be that you first initiated it, and then at some point you will be completed, and then you can just advance it there. So the base of all of this is DINA. It is an open source software, and it ties into the in our case into Specify 7, and it was developed by the MFN in context of the DINA collaboration. So we make lots of use of that. And that is all I wanted to tell you about our ABS implementation in our museum. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was marvelous, a marvelous summary. All right, let's have a look. We have a couple of questions for you. So this is from Greg Watkins Cole. Peter, Nagoya is so much fun. Doesn't matter if the specimen was collected after 12th of October 2014, but it was collected before the providing country ratified. That is, the country did ratify, but after the collection.
Sorry, I didn't get the initial part.
Okay. Does it matter if the specimen was collected after the 12th of October 2014, but it was collected before the country ratified?
Well, it depends on what you look at. As you saw in the diagram, you have two different sets of legislations that come into focus here. One is the European regulation, which requires all the different steps to be applicable to your specimen, whereas the national legislation may be different from the EU legislation. So you have to always focus on both of these and check both. And depending on the country you look at, you may fall. Your specimens may fall not necessarily under Nagoya then, but maybe under other regulations. And so I can't really say yes or no. It depends on the providing country.
Great. Okay. Let's see. So Dirk Newman is asking the briefcase number for individual documents. The briefcase number for individual documents would be equivalent with the document number on the respective permit? No,
it would not. Not necessarily. I mean, maybe by accident it may happen, but it's a newly generated document or briefcase number. It's not only one document. There may be several emails put in there. There may be several documents put into that briefcase, and this briefcase, so this entire set gets one number, and that is required for other instances in our implementation at the museum. So it is an internal number, but for tracking the data, for tracking the documents, it is essential. Sorry, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Thank you. Eva says, contracts and emails often contain person-related data or credential details. How do you guarantee confidentiality?
That is for, okay, personalized data. Well, we have it, and I can't really answer this properly, but we have this system on our museum servers and accessible to those who need it. And so I believe that it will not go to the outside, which is one thing that is required, and it will only be within the small circle, basically, that that needs this information. But within that, it is open.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for Peter? Oh, there is one. Mariko asks, which specific type of benefit sharing information do you capture in your database? Categorical or descriptive, scientific papers, collaboration, training, etc.?
That is a very good question, because you should indeed record all of your benefit sharing, because you might have to come back for that. So since it is still in the process of implementation, we have no experience with what documents will be uploaded, but any type of benefit sharing should be documented there. And so I believe it will be the whole set, whether it's capacity building, whether it's some training of some kind, whether it's collaborations or articles published by the group. It should be everything.
Right. There is one more question, Peter, which I can get you to answer in the Q&A tab, but we do need to move on to our next speaker. So thank you, Peter. Next speaker is Neus Nualart, and so if we can get you to turn on your video.
Yes. Okay.
All right, we can hear you, and
Yes, I think.
take it away, Sean, for the presentation.
Okay, I go on. I will present the presentation about photographs as a complement of Herbarium Vouchers, implementation of photo voucher and fusion voucher methodology in BC Herbarium of the Botanical Institute of Barcelona. Next slide, please. No. Okay. Not. Previous one? Okay, this one, yes. First of all, I'm glad to announce that this methodology has already been published in Taxon Journal last year. Next. The use of photos to complement herbarium specimens is something not new. Botanists have sometimes included even black and white to illustrate the collected plants. In the following slides, I will show some examples. First one, this one is a specimen of Juniperus collected in 1934 with two photos, one of the tail and another of the whole plant. Next. This one is a specimen of agave collected in 1987 with color photos of the habitat and the plant. Next. And finally, this one is a specimen of orchis collected recently, more recently in 1998 with detailed photos of the flowers. In the case of orchids, photos are very useful because their flowers quickly lose their color and also other characters can be lost during drying and press process. Next. There are different cases where photos can greatly increase the taxonomic value of specimens, mainly when the samples are very difficult or even impossible to collect. For instance, large species, anyone who has collected herbarium sheet from a palm tree or a cycad or an arborescent fern knows the difficulties involved. In these cases, photos of the whole plant and the habitat may constitute an important complement to a small sample collected of the plant. Next. Also, succulent plants that are very hard or even impossible to desiccate and often present thorns, spines, or teeth that also make difficult the collection. Next. In the case of toxic plants, collecting them can be harmful for the collector. Examples include plants with toxic or irritant latex, such as several species of Euphorbia, plants with phototoxic substances, like those found in many species of Heracleum, or plants with urticant hairs, such as the genus Urtica. Next. Also plants in inaccessible places, such as cliffs, caves, roofs, or trees, for instance, epiphytic orchids, in which collection may be difficult or even impossible. Next. And protected plants, either because the species itself is protected by law or because the population is included within a protected area. Also threatened species, according to the UCN criteria, in some cases, number of individuals is very low. Then it's not advisable to sacrifice a single individual from the population to obtain a specimen. Next. And finally, other special cases, like withered plants, where only seeds are collected for seed banks and individuals are dry and not suitable for pressing. Cases when the specimen to be vouchered is the only individual of a given locality, or sacred species or species located in sacred sites for the local communities. Next. After these different cases where the collection may be difficult or even impossible, I will talk now about the methodology implemented in the Herbarium. We give the name fusion voucher to specimens that have both as a small piece of the plant and also some photos in a standardized way. This kind of specimens considerably increases its taxonomic value as it combines the advantage of a physical herbarium specimens and the digital photo. The physical sample allows to carry out molecular studies, and the photo may help in the identification of the sample. It is mainly recommended for two large species, succulent species, etc. And plants that once pressed and dried lose totally or partially their morphological traits, like the color of the flower, as we have seen before for the orchids. Next. We use the term photo voucher, already used by Vicky Funk, who worked the most to rationalize the issue of vouchers when no specimen has collected and only photos are available. It is used when no physical sample can be gathered, like in protected species or species in protected areas or individuals that are in inaccessible places. In these cases, photo vouchers are the only form of documenting the presence of a plant in a given locality. We know that there exist some drawbacks, like the NIA studies are not possible, morphologic characters could be hidden, it's not recommended as general method by Vicky Funk, and they are not regarded as specimens according to the nomenclature code. Next. To use this kind of specimens as a reference material, we have developed a protocol that is already implemented in the Herbarium of the Botanical Institute of Barcelona. We have followed the criteria of maximum efficiency, easiness, and utility. Therefore, to be valid vouchers, photos must meet some technical requirements. Next. Photos should allow to the accurate identification of the plant. Detailed photos should be taken of the main organs. Pictures showing the whole plant and the species habitat must be included. Next. A red arrow may be used to indicate the individual in which is based the voucher when there are several individuals of the focus species or there are different species. For some monocarpic species, it's not possible to take photos of the same specimen with flowers and green leaves at the same time. For these cases, we recommend taking photos of different individuals within the same population, a vegetative one and a flowering one. Next. We strongly recommend the use of a ruler and, if it's possible, a standard color chart. The photos should also have enough resolution. We recommend a minimum of 300 ppi. Next. Okay, now regarding the deposit requirements, fusion vouchers should be deposited in a public herbarium collection since they include physical sample. In the case of photo vouchers, we recommend their deposit in a public institution to make them available for researchers. Herbarium labels should be provided with the same information than classical herbarium specimens. And once they are incorporated in the public herbarium, a unique registration number will be assigned using the Herbarium acronym, followed by IF, V, and PV to indicate if it's a fusion voucher or photo voucher respectively, and they should be accessible by internet. Next. The storage conditions may vary depending on the institution. In our BC Herbarium, pictures are printed and mounted on a sheet of herbarium paper, just as a classical herbarium sheets, including a complete label. Pictures are also stored as electronic files, and we include a QR code label to access the images when one is consulting the specimen. Next. Which are the advantages of integrating the digital photography? First, it alleviates the consequences of the impossibility of obtaining good physical specimens. It should be noted that the lack of classical herbarium specimens is not an impediment to develop taxonomic, floristic, or molecular studies. Second, it can help to solve the underrepresentation in herbaria of the species more difficult to collect. Next. I will finish my presentation with two examples. First one is an example of a fusion voucher. We have the first sheet. Well, this is a succulent and a spiny plant, an agave. In the first sheet, we have a physical sample, a piece of the leaf. In the second sheet, we have photos of the vegetative individual, indicating with a red arrow the individual gathered. And finally, we have also photos of the flowering individual in the third one. Next.
You have only a couple more minutes left.
Yes, okay, thanks. And this example of a photo voucher of a protected and threatened species. In this case, as you can see, only photos are included. Different pictures of the wall plant, the habitat, and details to show all characters that could help the identification of the taxon. Next. And well, to finish, thank you very much for your attention.
Marvelous. Thank you so very much. There's lots of comments coming through about the fabulous pictures.
Okay.
All right, so some questions. Is the paper used for the images attached to the herbarium sheets archival?
What? Sorry, I don't, if it's archival. Well, we just put the, I don't understand very well the question, but I think that we put all the images mounted in the sheet, and we preserve them in the inside the herbarium in humidity and temperature conditions, controlled conditions, and also we store them as an electronic file.
Neus?
Yes?
I think what she means is si es papel de archivo, si es libre de ácidos.
Okay, yes. Yes, it is. Okay. Yes, it is. Because all the paper that we use in the herbarium is without acid.
Fantastic. So this is another question from Julie Shapiro. Do you ever include the images of seeds of specific plant specimens or seedlings for your documentation? So do you have images of seeds or seedlings?
For seedlings, I don't remember that we have any photos of seeds in our vouchers that we have already done, but maybe it will be interesting to put also images of the seeds in the specimen. Yes, it will be good.
Okay. Oh man, this is moving around a lot. Kent Perkins.
A lot of questions.
Yes. Kent Perkins says, thank you, Neus. The code allows for illustrations. Can photos be counted as illustrations?
If can you repeat, please? If
The code, so the International Code of Nomenclature, allows for illustrations.
yes,
It's asking if photos can be counted as illustrations.
I think that in the Nomenclature International Code, photos are not counted as illustrations, only illustrations. Maybe it will be good to incorporate this in the next code. Maybe we can ask for this. Good question.
All right. Would it be feasible, Only is asking, would it be feasible to use these photos or fusion vouchers during BioBlitz events? And how much setup would this method require if you were going to set it up from scratch? Well, there's two questions there. First question,
Okay.
would it be feasible to use these photo fusion vouchers during BioBlitz events? Do you know what a BioBlitz is?
In a public event?
Yes.
I don't know, like what? Like which kind of public events?
So a BioBlitz is where the community comes together and looks for all the different species within an area within a certain time period. So do you think your technique can be used for an event such as that?
Yes, maybe, why not?
Okay. And how much setup does it take to how much time does it take to set up this methodology that you've developed from scratch?
How much time we have
Yes.
used it? We already implemented it last year, then it's very new. So we have not many experience about it. And last year it has been published in journal. Then now we are sharing this methodology in many places, and we hope that other herbarium also use it.
Okay. Julian Brown is asking, where are the images stored that the QR code links to?
In internet. Now we have in our public internet. I don't know, maybe we don't have a regulation for this. I mean, I think that many herbaria have their own internet pages, and maybe they can store these images to see them in the QR level.
Okay. Richard Whitty is asking, do you recommend photographing as lithophane for 3D printing? I'm not quite sure. Oh, so are you asking, Richard, whether you can use the photographs for 3D printing?
For 3D printing, wow. I have not think about it. We only use 2D photographs. I don't know much well about 3D printing.
Okay. Okay, so that's okay.
I have seen that someone put in the chat that Dropbox will be a good place to store the files. Also, we think that maybe Dropbox will be good, maybe, or Drive, something like this.
Just very, very quickly, is the protocol include information about the camera, the size, the format of the images, that sort of thing? That would all be in your publication?
Not really. We only put that the recommendation about the resolution, the 300 ppi. I think that with many cameras we can obtain this, also maybe mobile cameras. Then we just think that if the photo is good, maybe it's not so important the camera that we use.
Okay. And the protocol would be available through your publication, which is already in the chat link. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so very much. We don't have any more time for any more questions.
Thank you very much for all the questions. Sorry for my English, because maybe it's not very good, but
oh, it's better than me speaking your language, so. Okay. So next up we have Bernhard Zipfel, and he's going to be speaking about destructive sampling of fossils, striking a balance between scientific research and preservation.
Next slide, please. So much of the material that we have at the Evolutionary Studies Institute in Johannesburg, fossil material, spans an incredible period of time and essentially represents pretty much the entire sequence of life on Earth. This includes very early fish from the Permian period, going through to mammal-like reptiles, the therapsids, and the accompanying flora, through to early Jurassic dinosaurs, and then the Cenozoic fauna, and our actual claim to fame are the hominins. Historically, with our very recent colonial past, we've had a lot of destructive sampling happening to these things. Hominins seem to have received the most publicity and the most careful sampling, but essentially in the past, with the apartheid system, with our colonial heritage, people have essentially done as they pleased in the past. And now when we get requests for destructive sampling, we seem to have a problem with coming across a lot of our material that has been oversampled and sampled unnecessarily in many cases. Next, please. Having a look at sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly of destructive sampling, here's an example of bad destructive sampling, and probably the worst case I've ever seen. It's a modern human infant skeleton dated around 75,000 years. Sorry for the typo there, it should be 1,000 years before present. And approximately 50% of this specimen was destroyed. We're not even sure why, probably for dating studies. We have some idea of who did it. It was done without permission. And you can see on the left is a modern human infant, and most of this specimen has been destroyed. This is extremely scarce specimen. There's only one of its kind. And it's really important for us in Africa to look at these Middle Stone Age people as they represent potentially a common denominator for all of humanity. Next. So here's another example. This was a less malicious destruction of a specimen that was thought to be a very common taxon. And before the time of tomography and radiographic studies, people used to use what was called serial grinding, where you slice up the specimen in fairly thick slices, and you have these hand-drawn tomograms to study the internal morphology of these specimens. And once the study was completed, to the horror of the scientists, they discovered that they'd in fact destroyed a new species, in fact, the holotype of which has now been synonymized with Proteosuchus. Next, please. And subsequently, they did try to reconstruct it in the form of a wax model, but this has also been deformed over time. And colleagues of mine, Benoit and Jasinowski, in 2016, by using modern technology, CT scanning, managed to reconstruct the specimen from these hand-drawn model and have recreated it and reconstructed it, which is now in our type collection. Next, please. So enter the third science revolution, where, as everyone knows, we have modern micro-CT scanning, we have various imaging techniques in which we are able to slice and dice specimens, look at the internal morphology, and also reconstruct specimens where we don't want to completely prepare them out from their matrix and preserve them that way. And this way we are minimizing, or we thought we're going to minimize destructive sampling. Ironically, with this increase in technological capability, there's also an increase in the technology that requires destructive sampling, ironically. Next. So what are the reasons for destructive invasive sampling? Ancient DNA that was mentioned previously is obviously a very important component here, and isotope analyses, paleoproteomics using things like calculus have become very, very popular. Collagen fingerprinting, sorry for the typo there. Thin sectioning for histological studies, unfortunately, in paleontology is still something that's occasionally needed. And more of that is happening than what we'd expected with the modern technology. Next. So looking at some examples that worked and some that didn't. Next, please. As I mentioned before, hominin material is considered particularly rare, and it's extremely rare resource. And here in South Africa, we're very fortunate in that we have probably some in the region of 40% of the world's hominin, early hominin heritage. You can see on the top left, there's a hominin tooth that has been pretty much completely destroyed, in this case for isotope studies. And about 30 specimens were used in this case, which makes up a substantial percentage of our tooth collection for these early hominins at around 1.8 to 2.2 million years old. On the right, I challenge you to see where the destruction happened. Very small holes drilled, which was thought to be acceptable. Other times where we get a distal bone that's been damaged has been sectioned for studies. Next. So coming back to that tooth where those tiny holes, here was an interesting study looking for evidence for dietary change, but not landscape use in South African hominins. Here, a large sample of approximately 60 teeth were used with these tiny holes made in them. And subsequently, these scientists have come back and want to sample another 60 of these teeth, which were subsequently turned down. The reason was that once we start making these tiny holes, which seem tiny, but on a small tooth, take up a substantial amount of that tooth material, you want to put more holes into them. Eventually, these specimens, these very rare specimens, start looking like Swiss cheese. Next. Here is another study using Karoo vertebrates from the Permo-Triassic period. Very large sample of 39 teeth, 97 bones, 116 fossil individuals were sampled to look at bone appetite, and fairly large chunks of these are required to do this study. But these are larger specimens. A lot of them are fairly damaged already, and taking these samples don't necessarily change anything to the morphology of these specimens. But once we've done that on 116 specimens, to do it again on the same specimen, then it starts looking like we're causing some damage. But this was a very successful study in that we were able to look at these global climate perturbations in the Permo-Triassic extinction period and found that very small changes in climate increase in temperature result in these mass extinctions, which of course is really important for today. Moving back to looking at ancient DNA that was mentioned before, which is now really the thing people are after as technology changes. We also find a lot of our fossils are not actually all fossilized. There's still a fair bit of material left that is not entirely decalcified. Here we're looking at specimens from Border Cave dated at around 75,000 years BP. Next, please. And the scientists, in this case from Uppsala in Sweden, said, look, you'll hardly see these damages to these fossils. We went ahead with this, and you can see the pre-sampling on the left and the sampling on the right. These are substantial holes made in these very, very scarce specimens. In this case, petrous bone is where you have two petrous bones in a specimen. In most cases, there's only one if you are lucky. So there's only a handful of such samples. We're not able to change that. In this particular case, the results came back as Papio ursinus. That's a Chacma baboon. Obviously, this is not a baboon. This is a modern human, and there would have been some form of contamination that happened, probably a baboon that had urinated on the skeleton at some point. So here we have negative results and a damaged specimen. So here you can also see pre-sampling, post-sampling. Next. Pre-sampling, post-sampling. Next. And those were all negative results. Here as well, pre-sampling, post-sampling, unfortunately no DNA extracted. Next. Here's an interesting case where from Plover's Lake, which is in the internal part of South Africa, close to Johannesburg, thought to be 75,000-year-old humans using lead on calcium carbonate. And in the application for DNA sampling, because it was thought to be well dated, looked at a bovid, sincerus, that's a buffalo, and material was sampled for DNA. Next, please.
You're at 12 minutes, Bernhard.
Thank you. And very careful sterile procedure. Next. And subsequently, it was found that the results were not quite what we expected. Next. The expected results were ancient DNA consistent with hunter-gatherers from 70,000 years ago. Next. And unfortunately, it turned out that the recent DNA people from 350 years ago. Next. And the buffalo sample from the same locality was supposed to be an ancient buffalo. Next. And that turned out to be a Nguni cow, which is from about 350 years ago. So it's interesting that sometimes you're looking for ancient DNA, and it turns out not to be so ancient after all. So a valuable study. Next. So where does that leave us? Looking at the literature, there's been a lot of emphasis on hominid remains. But also in archaeofaunal studies, we need to realize this is not a limitless resource, and ethics and guidelines are important for this type of sampling. Next. Now, just quickly, in South Africa, strict and rigorous heritage laws of the world. We are not allowed to buy, sell, destroy, export any fossil material or any heritage material without the necessary permits. So it is our job to be extremely strict on how this happens. But unfortunately, people who have excavated the material think they have a certain amount of ownership of that material. And we are interested in how we go about our business of destructive sampling. So the considerations of the researchers are to collaborate, to have a sampling strategy, which requires documentation, sample size, evidence of successive permission, sharing of the generated data, and most importantly, that these results are published and fully published, including negative results. Next. From the institution's point of view, and this is where our dilemma is, that we allow to when we don't allow for this kind of sampling. There's a strict application for large advisory panel that looks at it. We also consult with specialists outside of our group to get advice. Material to be sampled, the sampling size, the collection size, the specimen status. As a general rule, we do not sample holotypes, and what publications are connected to those samples, that they are already well documented, CT scanned and photographed. The documentation needs to be thorough. The permit application with the South African Heritage Resources Agency, ultimately, yay or nays any application. Acknowledgements to our institution, and most importantly, that these results are shared in future. The bottom line is we now wish to probably put a moratorium on this kind of sampling for a while until we have our protocols absolutely thoroughly put together. We also feel that if there's any doubt of whether you want to sample or not, perhaps there should be a delay in the sampling or a projection of the application. Next.
You're now at 15 minutes.
So we feel that it's okay to say no to destructive sampling. Next, thank you.
Fantastic statement at the end there. Thanks, Bernhard. That was fantastic. I'm often concerned about destructive sampling in my collection, where some researchers think we should just end up with a twig because they just want to keep repeating to sample the same one specimen. All right, we have quite a number of questions for you, but we only have about three minutes. Julie Shapiro asks, is there a way to use the same hole in the tooth example to do sample work and or import a micro camera within it in order not to continue damaging the specimen?
There probably is a way. The problem we have is that researchers often want to take the quickest, easiest route to getting the job done. And that is why we need to consult more with experts in the field. Because often we have the person extracting the DNA or doing the isotope study who tells us, no, we need X, Y, and Z to do the job. And often it is taking a shortcut. So yes, I think it is possible to use that same hole or that same area, but it would take more effort on the part of the researcher.
All right. Carrie Levitt-Bussian is asking, why do you think that an increase in tech results in an increase in destructive sampling? Why? Why do you think that an increase in, yeah.
Well, I guess as we're getting better non-destructive sampling techniques like imaging, the technology is also moving ahead in terms of what can be done with physical material. And we see that with the DNA, proteomics, these sorts of things have now become very popular. And it seems to be, there was a stage a few years ago, we thought, oh, we hardly ever going to destructive sampling again. But there's more demand now for it than ever before.
Amanda Millhouse asks, Bernhard, how do you track what has been sampled? Do you record it in your database or with the specimen records? And what type of information do you record? Is it full results or just what sampling occurred?
Yeah. So historically, these records have not been very good at all. Sometimes there was a record, sometimes not. But in the last decade or so, these are recorded on the electronic database. Unfortunately, we're not quite with Specify yet, but it is recorded in the electronic database. Also, from the curatorial point of view, the actual application process and the paperwork is also very carefully recorded and kept so that you can link from the database to the correspondence regarding the actual sampling. And we find that more and more useful is that in the database we see sampling done on a particular date. We can go back to our correspondence and look at the paperwork, see the kinds of proposals, because research proposals are also required. And then, of course, looking at the South African Heritage Resources Agency also demands report backs on all of these samples to see whether they're successful or not. And they will not give another permit if they found that previous sampling has not been successful or not done meticulously.
That leads us to your final question, which is, do you have any advice on how to, quote unquote, punish researchers who conduct terrible destructive sampling? Can we charge them, never allow them in collections again? And I think you partially answered that already.
That's a great question. Thank you very much. And it's something that's only recently given us more thought. We will ban those people from sampling again. In fact, the South African Heritage Resources Agency would want to lay criminal charges against people that have done things that they weren't permitted to do, and possibly even lead to them not being able to enter the country in future. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that destructive sampling are also our colleagues and collaborators, and often staff, we encourage collaboration. So someone like myself gets invited onto these projects quite regularly. So we're also being very careful. At the moment, I'm, for example, on a project that requires destructive sampling. I have other curatorial colleagues who take over that particular application, and I give full disclosure. So it's a very fine line. And I personally admit to being slightly guilty of that, where it just looks like a good project when I'm on it. I have to be honest. So we are being exceptionally careful with that. And as I say, we may well put a moratorium on destructive sampling until we've tightened up on all the protocols.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. And you have a lot of more questions in the Q&A. So if you'd like to answer them offline, that would be fantastic. And a couple in the chat too.
Thank you, Shirley. I will do that. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So up next, we have Julian Carter. And so we get him ready here, and he's going to be speaking about no more plastic. See plastic dumped on museum displays. Museum conservation supporting activism. Thanks, Julian.
Right, good morning. From the early hours of here in the UK in Cardiff. This talk's going to be about an intervention project we did a couple of years ago. Very much a community-led intervention project that utilised our open dioramas and displays in an innovative and sort of creative way to highlight the issues around plastic pollution. Before I get going, the title of the talk, No More Plastic. More is, in the Welsh language, means sea. So it's kind of a play on words. No more plastic, kind of translate to sea plastic. Play between the English and the Welsh languages. Next slide, please. The National Museum of Wales, we're doing a lot more in recent years with various community-led intervention projects utilising the collections across all our sites and different parts of the museum. This is one of those pilot interventions with our youth-led group, which is the Youth Forum, which is a mix of youth that have been coming in on a framework over a number of years, and recently led to more formal projects, a lottery-funded project called Hands on Heritage. And this is one of the pilot projects. The interesting thing about these projects is that a lot of the time when we've got the communities coming, they don't necessarily connect with the museums, with the collections, or understand the work that goes into collections. And projects like this had an interesting sideline in that the normal behind the scenes activities, such as bringing materials into the museum and how we have to look after them and bring them into the collections, played an important role. Next slide. The museum itself, in the natural sciences, we've kind of got a background of trying to be playful with the way we use the collections. And certainly over recent years, we've done a number of interventions on our own front, working with both art groups. A couple of pictures here are from a project called Museum in a House, where as part of an art project, we overtook somebody's house for a couple of days and made it into a sort of natural history museum come house, which was a lot of fun. And also other interventions. And whilst there might be serious questions or messages underlying these, they're often quite quirky and quite fun. Next slide, please. This was a bit more different, coming on the back of the Attenborough effect, the blue planet, and the sudden wave in concern about plastic pollution, which us in the museum world and conservation world have been harking about for many, many years. We were wondering if there was a way we could utilise the displays in some sort of creative way to pick up on this wave of concern. And this is where the the youth forum started to come in. We gave them the idea of, did they want to do something? And if so, how would they do it? Next slide, please. And the interesting thing was they came up with the whole concept of museum, which is we want to use the real thing. We want to use rubbish. Can we use rubbish with the collections? And they started to work with the Surfers Against Sewage and work with them about how they could actually collect this beach rubbish, bring it into the museum and utilize it in some way in this intervention. Next slide, please. The interesting thing, this is immediately where the conservation process comes in. This is where the behind the scenes comes in. So the team behind this, can we do it? And we always like to say yes rather than no. But it brought a whole raft of issues with it: pest management, health and safety, contamination of the material, all sorts of issues. And we kind of sat down with them and said, this is how we need to approach it. This material, you're going to need to bring it into the museum. We're going to need to freeze it. We need to wash it. We're going to need to sort it. Well, you guys are. You're going to need to remove the needles, use condoms, all the other paraphernalia that comes in with this stuff. And then you've got to think about how we're going to utilize it or into the display or the project you want to do. Next slide, please. So this is the team. They got stuck into this in a big way. This is coming in with some of the Surfers Against Sewage team, working with the team, sorting through, cleaning, a lot of trash. It was quite amazing how much stuff they brought into the museum, and quite funny. Next slide, please. And the scale of the project just gradually got bigger and bigger because they brought in all this material. It was cleaned, it was sorted. We went short of actually accessioning it because the challenges that brings of accessioning materials. We want to accession this lot. But it did bring a wave of enthusiasm, which was really impressive to see. Next slide. And this is the team, sort of some of the creations that make as they went through with it. Next slide, please. But it became a bigger collaborative effort because the youth forum is quite a mixed group with mixed abilities, mixed attention spans. And they started to sort themselves out in the best way of utilizing their skill sets and the way they could handle it, how they got engaged in different ways. And it was really good to see them being together, solving problems, empowering themselves and making their own decisions. Next slide, please. So they looked at the exhibition areas, and we have a number of big open sort of dioramas that feature the marine environment in quite a prominent way, like a big sea cliff, the seashore. We have a whale skeleton, humpback whale skeleton on quite open display, a leatherback turtle, which is officially the world's biggest. And they devised a way of how they wanted to sort of link this project together and those displays within the project. And this is their own artwork, which is generated from it. Next slide, please. And then we got to the installation. Some of it we had to do for them, such as operating the scissor lifts and hanging things from the ceiling. The rest, we just let them loose in the galleries, which they couldn't believe. It was up to them where they put it. They were given some guidelines about, you know, protecting the specimens and things on display. But essentially, we were giving them and trusting them to operate within the gallery environment to install their own intervention. Next slide, please. The thing about this intervention is we didn't really tell people we were doing it. We got the permission through the museum for the requirements, but we didn't want people to know we were doing it. The time span was during the summer holidays when we're busy, so when we get big visitors coming in. But the museum assistants, a lot of the curatorial staff, a lot of the even the senior staff didn't realise we were going to do this. So our museum shut on a Monday. We did the installation on a Monday. We opened on a Tuesday, and suddenly the pristine gallery was covered in rubbish and crap and general detritus and these interventions that the youth had sort of drawn together. And it really took people by surprise. The team also prepared some blurb. This is an example of it. So on the day, both within the museum and on the various social media feeds, they released the information about what was going on and why they were doing it. Next slide, please. And this is an example of how they, you know, if people started to panic why we're covering the collections in rubbish and all sorts of detritus, They put out an example of what they're doing and how they worked at the museum and took approaches to do this in a safe and meaningful manner. Next slide, please. And then it was quite impressive, the impact of visitors and families. You know, they didn't know we'd done this. They were expecting, a lot of our visitors are repeat visitors, especially in the summer holidays. And suddenly they come in and see sort of favourite displays and specimens and see all this trash thrown in place. And it really engaged because the MAs, the museum assistants themselves were engaging with the families and the visitors that came in. The kids were sort of almost explaining the problem to the adults. Some of our video feeds and things also been taken over by the youth with their own sort of animations and their own little projects. And it had a huge, huge impact. Next slide, please. And this is some of the images. This is an example from our humpback whale skeleton. Well, I said spread some rubbish. They went and spread some rubbish. It went everywhere. It was quite impressive. The other impact at the end of it, which was quite interesting, was there was more rubbish than when we started. Some of our visitors have been adding their own rubbish to the collection, which just shows the example of rubbish attracts rubbish. Next slide, please. Another example, this octopus creation out of plastic from the beaches went on to have a life in the Mardi Gras and all sorts of other things, and I think it's still going around somewhere in the collections. Next slide, please. And this is our leatherback turtle display. The leatherback turtle is actually officially the world's largest turtle, and itself was caught up in fishing tackle when it died in the 1980s. And when the autopsy was done, it also had plastic bags in its system. So the whole impact of this plastic pollution that affects the environment came round, and you've added this sort of intervention with the turtle reflecting the issues that had affected it. Next slide, please. The plastic got everywhere and their creations got everywhere and even got included in some of the cases in all sorts of displays. Next slide. And this is looking down on our seashore diorama, which again, sea cliff and all the rest of it was liberally covered in a dose of plastic tokens and things. Next slide, please. Another example of the rubbish and the impact. Next slide, please. The other thing they did during the week is they did a number of sort of workshops out in the gallery themselves, interacting with the visitors. And the one day that could have been a potential nightmare was the boards that we put out on display, replacing some of the normal text panels, in which people could add their comments and stickers and their own ideas. And letting people loose with markers and stickers in the galleries is a recipe for disaster, potentially. Amazingly, we had no problems. And it just shows when you do entrust people to be responsible, they can do it. It's quite impressive. Next slide, please. So at the end of it, the youth had an evaluation on it, on the impact of what this meant to them. Certainly after we did the clear up and everything went on to be cleaned off and recycled, and some of the made materials were kept for use in other directions and other displays and activities. And the one thing that really came out with them was the ownership they had of the project. You know, ultimately, it was their ideas. They were the drivers of it. And they were amazed to be entrusted to work in the galleries in this way. Normally, the curators, or you know, it's not something they would perceive to be sort of allowed loose in the manner they were, and they valued the fact they were trusted, and it made a big difference to the impact they got from the project. Next slide, please. And it's gone on from there. We have some sister galleries we work with. This is Oriel the Park, which is in the National Park, the Pembrokeshire National Park in West Wales, a very, very beautiful part of the world. And they have a couple of high-class gallery areas primarily for the display of high-end art. But recently, we've been doing more and more mixed media stuff with natural science and archaeology and all sorts of other things mixed in with the artworks. And this is an example of the Coast exhibition in which we mixed the arts, the natural science of the area with the plastic intervention as well. And they came out with some quite cool things here, like species descriptions of the different types of plastics, which got incorporated into the gallery. And it was a huge success, and very, very well received by the communities that the gallery sits within. Next slide, please. And so just a few things to finish with, really, that we sort of got from it. It was the ability for conservation, normally a perceived behind-the-scenes activity, the handling of materials and collections to come forward and play a very integral part with enabling such an activity, such an intervention to take place. And also to see the problem solving and the creativity come out of this youth, just to be able to help nurture it and nudge it forward. To make this rapid intervention that was there for 1 week and disappeared as quickly as it came as part of the impact. And that's it really for me.
Amazing. That's, everyone has just been giving you the big thumbs up in the chat there, Julian. Fantastic presentation. Thank you. We have 5 minutes for questions. Let's see whether your questions start. Okay. Julie Shapiro was asking, what is the number and average age of the youth forum group?
I don't know offhand, it's quite variable. Some of them, they come from quite a raft of backgrounds, autism and some sort of disabilities. Some are just, it's a big variety. They're quite intriguing to work with because of that variety, and it's quite broad. It's also quite variable because some of them dip in and then they go away and lose interest, others come in. It has been done. There's been a big evaluation on this, but I don't know it offhand.
Okay. Let's see. Is it possible for your amazing work to be developed for other museums globally or even for aquariums? Have there been articles about how you went about putting this together, or a blog, perhaps?
There are some short blogs out there. I'll have to dig out the links for it. And there has been there was some research done on this by Cardiff University because they've been involved in the project. I don't know if that's been published or not. I have to put my hands up to being quite guilty because of time constraints. I haven't published on this properly. All I've done is this talk and another talk, and it's something we should pull together because it was these projects work extremely well, and they can certainly be built on in different ways by other organisations across the globe. So I need to pull my finger out.
Happens to the best of us. Alana Rivera says, so the exhibition was a week. How long was the preparation with all the work done? And thank you so much. This work was awesome. Is awesome.
The preparation was a lot. It took them many weeks. The youth forum come in once or twice a week, and they spent many weeks on this. The scale of it got bigger and bigger, and they kind of overwhelmed themselves a bit, but that was kind of the fun of it. So a lot of preparation. But I think the nice thing to point out is we managed to recycle elements of this in different ways. So it has an ongoing impact.
So following on from that, Jean-Marc Gagnon says, would you do it again?
Yes. Yes, is the answer. But it'd be nice to try and think about doing it differently. Again, the idea came from the youth and that community group. So maybe find a different community group and offer the collections to, or the gallery spaces to them and say, what do you fancy doing and how can we facilitate it? But yes, definitely. It's really rewarding doing these projects. Tough, it's a lot of work, but it's just great.
Jenny Gosling is asking, how much cleaning did you do of the plastic? Were you removing marine organisms like small barnacles, or was it relatively clean to start with?
To be honest, it was more from a pest management point of view and making sure all the sharps and needles and things like the condoms are taken out. So it was cleaned, but not thoroughly cleaned, and frozen. And it was a wash with a sort of disinfectant wash. And then we made sure the stuff was frozen for quite a number of weeks before we brought it out, dried it properly, and allowed it to be used in the galleries. So it taught them pest management controls, collection management, the way we need to approach things in the museum, and they appreciated that. Gave them a good insight into the whole workings of things.
Rebecca Newbury asks, how long was the project from planning to clean up and evaluation?
Ooh, tricky one, because like a lot of things in museums, to make the more interesting projects like this happen, you kind of have to initially fly it under the wire enough so that the management don't know you're up to it. So there was some sneaky pre-planning to say, yeah, this will be all right. Sorry, did I say that out loud across the globe?
Lauren Smith from the Field Museum asks, are there any next steps you are considering for these amazing youths taking it to city council members or legislators, because she thinks that this could very easily turn into a movement for your community?
This is actually part of a much bigger ongoing thing in the museum, in our museum, and connected with other museums across Wales. It's called Hands on Heritage. It's about £1 million worth of lottery funding that's coming into it as well. And we've got staff employed now that are not working with this youth forum, but also other community groups. We have heritage ambassadors now from across the communities representing, particularly like Cardiff, with Somali communities and all sorts of things. And they've now got active involvement in the museum, and we've utilised the collections and displays as part of this Hands on Heritage project. So it was actually a pilot for what's becoming a much bigger thing in the way the museum works under this sort of cultural democracy framework.
Marvellous. Thank you so very much, Julian. There are a few more questions in the Q&A, and there's a couple in the chat for you as well. So if you'd like to answer those, otherwise, if we've got some time at the end, we'll come back to you. Marvellous. Thank you. All right. So next up, we have Eva Häffner talking about a complete digitization of German herbaria is possible, sensible, and should be started now. Right now, and here she goes.
Well, thank you, Shelley, and hello, everybody. Yes, a complete digitization of German herbaria is sensible, possible, and should be started now is not only the title of this presentation, but also of an article that has been published by 51 authors of 30 institutions early this year. So next slide, please. There it is. So why do we plead for this? What can you do with digitized collections that you can't do now? Some of the reasons may seem trivial to you, but we also want to reach out to people outside the collections community to understand. Well, first of all, digitization makes collections comprehensively searchable. You can find all known specimens of a taxon of interest with a single search, ideally. And it makes it also searchable for categories other than taxa, like collection date or collector or region. For example, we at the Botanic Garden and Botanical Museum, we don't know how many specimens we might really have, for example, from Papua New Guinea or collected in 1956, because we just can't search for it. And then digitized specimens allow stable linkage of associated information like cultures and DNA sequences and many more that are then reliably documented in this way. And it is possible to interoperably link external resources like, for example, persons or geographic features, and thus complement the information attached to them. In short, digitized collections make biodiversity research many, many times more efficient and accelerate biodiversity discovery. So next slide, please. To illustrate this, I want to show you an example of an extraordinary work, the first author of which, Pablo Munoz Rodriguez, has just been awarded the new CTAF eScore Award for Outstanding Collections-Based Research. It is a monograph of the genus Ipomoea, the sweet potato relatives, in which 63 new species have been described and material from 72 herbaria has been analyzed. And in the next slide, the authors state in their article that with a minimum estimate of 200,000 specimens of Ipomoea in the world's herbaria, obtaining all specimens on loan was neither practical nor necessary. Fortunately, we had ready access to large collections of Herbaria at Giere and Natural History Museum London, and by combining the study of specimens at these institutions with images in virtual herbaria and the insights of previous taxonomists, we were able to determine important and useful taxonomic characters and thus begin to delimit species. So the next slide, please. A further application of digitized collections is that it makes data available for big data analysis. So you can, for example, use the data for reconstructing biodiversity change in space and time. And it allows cross-domain data integration and thus gives new insights in relationships like biodiversity change that goes, for example, along with climate change. And you can use the data to model biodiversity change in the future. And you can use them to predict the effect of diverse factors, like, for example, land use change. In short, it creates a reliable, documented, and curated data resource for assessing global change. So in the next slide, you see an example. This is a reconstruction of the historical distribution of the false flax Camelina alyssum in Germany from herbarium specimens. And this is a species that is now unfortunately extinct in Central Europe due to land use change. In the next slide, the last set of reasons for digitization that I would like to mention today is automated image analysis by artificial intelligence. Digitized herbarium specimens are a rich resource to train these programs, and once they are successful, it should be possible to use them, for example, for automated species identification, and possibly also for things like automated pathogen detection or something like that in the images. In short, it makes images available for new research approaches. And in the next slide, you see the example. So here's the results of analysis conducted with an artificial intelligence, a so-called convolutional neural network, CNN, that was trained to recognize taxa in a data set of 200,000 digitized specimens. And you can see in the upper graph that with using the full data set in almost 80% of the cases, the CNN listed the correct taxon as the top hit, and in more than 95%, the correct taxon was among the top 5 hits. And the lower graph shows you that not only taxon recognition, but also the recognition of single leaf traits, like for example, leaf shape or leaf placement was also quite good. The columns show the individual traits. You can't read that now, but it's like leaf margin entire or leaves ovoid or something like that. And the blue column is always the complete number of the data set, and the green ones is the correctly predicted leaf trait. And so especially with the higher number of training sets, the prediction was also quite good. And on the right-hand side, you see that the CNN was also able to accurately predict plant organs on a herbarium specimen, like, for example, stems, leaves, or flowers. And you can use that to analyze, for example, herbarium specimens for phenological studies. So the next slide, please. So these advantages I've just listed basically apply to all kinds of digitized collections. So why do we propose to start with herbaria? First of all, the botanical community is a highly organized community, not only in Germany, the Index Herbarium, for example, being a good example for that. And second, herbaria hold a high proportion of flat objects, which is actually what we want to start with, because they are easy to digitize, and so they can be used as a test case to show what it means if you have one collection type completely digitized. Herbarium specimens have, thirdly, an important role in the scientific workflows as a permanent reference. And fourth, the technical infrastructure to build such an infrastructure of herbarium or botanical collections is basically already existing, as I will show you in a minute. And next slide, please. So in Germany, there are 70 herbaria that hold altogether 22.2 million specimens, according to Index Herbariorum 2019. And according to a survey that was conducted by the Botanic Garden and Botanical Museum in Berlin, in which 62 herbaria participated, there was an estimate of already 22.8 million specimens. The institutional affiliation of German herbaria is very heterogeneous. Most are held by universities, as you can see here in the bottom, and some fewer are, for example, held by municipal or state museums, also by federal organizations such as Leibniz Research Museums, and some also by non-governmental organizations. Next slide, please. Herbaria hold a large range of different organisms, not only higher plants, but also mosses, liverworts, fungi, including lichens, algae, and even protists, such as myxomycetes. And the specimens are stored in a lot of different formats, such as cardboard sheets, envelopes, vessels, boxes, and even microscope slides. And in the next slide, you see that only 13% of the specimens in German herbaria are digitized. And digitization means, in the very broad sense, that is basically most of them, as you can see on the right-hand side, are data-based only, and only 1/3 of these 13% digitized specimens is also available with images. That is a very low proportion. And in the next slide, you see the proportion of digitized specimens for the individual institutions covered in the survey. In dark blue, you can see the proportion of digitized specimens, and light blue is non-digitized specimens, and you can see that most of us still have quite a long way to go. In the next slide, the good news, however, is that digitization workflows already exist in Germany, also inspired by initiatives in other countries and at other institutions, for example, in Paris or in Edinburgh or Mese. And the equipment exists at several German institutions, for example, for flat object sheets that you can see on the left-hand side here, a station in Berlin. And also for smaller three-dimensional macro objects like fungi, as shown on the right side in Munich. And even for single objects on microscope slides, like for example, this diatom here at the bottom, a workflow that was developed in the famous Fustedt collection at the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven. The next slide shows the slide I promised you earlier about the technical infrastructure. It is just an example for networking technologies that have been developed in various projects and are more or less widely used today. They include collection databases, standards and access protocols, portals, for example, tools for annotation and semantic enrichment, or for international networking, just to list some of them. And in the next slide, you see that although we have to promote the endeavor on a national level, we think, of course, globally. The envisaged infrastructure will be fully compliant with international standards and will be contributed to and also benefiting from international consortia and initiatives such as GBIF, CTAF, and also the research infrastructure that is emerging from this community right now, which is DISCO. And next slide, please. With this outlook, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions if there's still time. Thank you.
There is definitely still time, and there may be some questions for you. Fabulous talk. Thank you so very much for that. Let's see. No. Anyone have any questions for Eva? Everyone's saying thank you in the chat. here we go. Joaquim Santos asks, how will you fund it? The big question we all ask.
We are not funded so far. This is why we have gathered the community and make the concepts and made the case actually. What has been funded have been individual projects. So of course there have been limited digitization projects so far, and especially with our national funding organization, a lot of things have been funded doing this networking technology and the technical infrastructure design. So there's been going a lot of funding into that, but the actual digitization is still something where funds are lacking, but we hope that we will be successful sometime soon.
I hope so too. All right, so Lauren Gardner asks, what have been the challenges in bringing collections across Germany together on this project?
The challenges are quite on a few levels. As I said, we don't have the funding for the actual digitization yet. And so the challenge, the main challenge was to keep the connection. Yeah, but that's also the good thing about it. It's not only a challenge, it's also a great fun because the community, is a very committed one. And so you have to keep the constant contact between the institutions. You have to decide of what you want to do in common and what every institution wants to do by itself. Like example, do you want to have a common portal? Do you want to have common software development, things like that. And as I said, it is just a proposal. It is something that we want to do and want to complete, and the conceptual work has been done quite to some degree.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's also a fantastic opportunity. All right, so James Macklin is asking, would you digitize a single institution's collection in place or set up an imaging facility and ship specimens to it to be more efficient?
So this is something that we have been discussing a lot, and so far we think in different lines. What be, I think, a sensible thing to do to have some decentral stations distributed all over the country, that you don't have to ship too many specimens all to one place, which is also a great risk, but not to do it at any individual institution separately. So maybe a compromise between both would be a good thing, we thought.
So the next two questions are sort of interrelated, so I'm going to just combine them. So do you envisage the databasing to be a volunteer project derived from an image, and do you have an estimate for the proportion of extra time for packet specimens above that required for specimen sheets? So the first question from Riley and Gib S is basically, you know, do you envisage the databasing and this enterprise being a volunteer or paid staff project?
This is also quite interesting. We have a volunteer project in place right now at the museum, at the Botanic Garden and Botanical Museum in Berlin, which is called the Herbaria. And this is a volunteer project which is really successful. They do a lot of databasing of images, and it is, also for the people, they are really committed. And but I think you can't probably do all the things by these projects. So you would also have some pay stuff, and of course automated recognition of labels, like machine reading technologies, might also be a way to capture the data.
And the second part was, do you have an estimate for a proportion of extra time for packet and other non-flat specimens above that required for the sheet specimens?
We don't have an exact number yet, but we have the numbers of non-mounted specimens. We have it from the survey, and in some herbaria that is quite high. It differs between the institutions, and definitely some funds have to be acquired for that.
Okay, your final question from Rich Rabler. Are you considering being able to take advantage of matching data from duplicate specimens as an efficiency?
Oh, good, good idea. I'm not aware of that. Maybe one of my colleagues has thought this through, and I will definitely bring it back into the community once we proceed. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Eva, for your presentation. It was wonderful. It's good to see that collaborative effort going on to create more data. We love data. Right. So our final speaker, yes, we have come to the end of our session, but we're not there yet. We have Jana Hoffmann, and she is going to be doing a presentation that is pre-recorded, but I believe she is here live to answer questions at the end. And there she is.
Yeah, hello. Hello, everybody. Actually, I would prefer to give the presentation live. Sorry, a little bit of a change in plan, if okay for you. I have been made co-host already, so I can share my screen.
Perfect. Far away.
Good. Then I could just start. Hey, hi. So I hope you all can see my screen. Just a brief indication if that's the case would be great, so that I know that everything is set up. I'll have to see if I can.
You're all good to go.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Hello. My name is Jana Hoffmann. I'm head of the science program Digital World and Information Science at the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin, Germany. And today I would like to introduce you to a model example for a media application lab. The example that I want to give is the Mediasphere for Nature. It is a media application lab that is promoting the collaboration of institutions holding attractive and diverse media content originating from research and scientific collections with small and medium-sized enterprises of the media and creative industry. All around the globe, natural history institutions holding scientific collections or materials related to natural history are seeking out new partnerships and new ways of reusing their collection outside of the domain of, for example, biodiversity research or evolutionary biology. The reasons are manifold. Just to name a few here, for example, institutions are trying to meet the demands of a wider user group or other so far unknown research communities in order to become more relevant for research and society in general. This also includes the citizen science approach. Institutions are also trying new ways to create revenue in a more and more insecure situation in terms of funding, or they simply want to boost their internal institutional innovation by opening up to other and new technologies. Today, I would like to give you some insights into our attempts at the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin to connect with the culture and creative sector in particular. I would like to describe our developed showcases and co-created prototypes and products and the infrastructure for this interaction. Our collaboration in Berlin with the creative industry started already a couple of years ago, like 7 years ago. We were partners in the Europeana Creative Project, which aimed at enabling and promoting a greater reuse of cultural heritage resources by the creative industries. The project was carried out by 26 partners from 14 European countries and consisted of a highly interdisciplinary team of representatives of content providing institutions, representatives of the creative industry, software developers, and multimedia experts. The project set out to demonstrate that Europeana, the online portal providing access to millions of digitized cultural heritage objects from Europe's CLAM institutions, can facilitate the creative reuse of digital cultural heritage content and associated metadata. Our team at Berlin, with the team from the Národní Museum in Prague in the Czech Republic, was representing the natural history institutions, and we created two natural history pilots in close collaboration with companies, a memory game and a hidden object game. Unfortunately, none of the pilots made it into production, as they were more intended to showcase the potential of the collaboration itself. The other important stepping stone was our continuous participation as content providing institutions in the Coding Da Vinci hackathon. Coding Da Vinci is the first German open cultural data hackathon. It was founded in Berlin in 2014 and brings together cultural heritage institutions with the hacker and designer communities to develop ideas and prototypes for the cultural sector and for the public. The Museum für Naturkunde Berlin is participating in the Coding Da Vinci hackathon since 2014, so basically since the beginning, and provided various content like sound, photo, illustration, scans, 3D images, and transcribed text for the challenges. In the hackathon, teams form based on an idea pitch session. Then they were given a certain time for the project to be completed, and some of the project actually picked up our content and developed their ideas based on the content we provided. And some of those have been so successful that they actually won awards, like the Coding Da Vinci Awards. One of them was, for example, the Scalex application, a 3D virtual reality application based on a snake skeleton, a 3D snake skeleton from our collection, or the Snail Snap app, a selfie app that takes a selfie of you and composes your picture out of pictures of snails from our collection based on pattern recognition algorithms. New partners need new ways, new formats, or new infrastructure for fruitful collaboration and interaction. So how do we build a suitable environment for co-creation? The innovative and unique approach of a media application lab is to foster collaboration with CLAM institutions like galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, holding diverse media content originating from our research or the digitization of our scientific collections with the small, medium-sized enterprises from the cultural and creative sector. This can be carried out in a thoroughly collaborative way by pooling required resources. It can be carried out by jointly applying for further funding, or in a more traditional customer-contractor relationship. Mediasphere for Nature has been designed and implemented through the project Naturkunde 36524 and was funded by the European Commission and the Senate of Berlin. It ran from 2016 to 2020. Through this open lab infrastructure, the Museum für Naturkunde has partnered with about 20 different regional small and medium-sized enterprises in designing, testing, and implementing prototypes and products in an open, collaborative, and non-customer contractor approach. Mediasphere sustains a partner network of about 40 interested startups, SMEs, associations, and individuals at the moment. As part of the digital strategy of the Museum für Naturkunde Berlin, it is meant to be the primary place to go for startups, SMEs, and industry to develop knowledge-based products and services relevant for nature and society. Our Media Application Lab provides infrastructure for product testing and presentation to a wider public, like a test lab, a public product test lab, an environment for the publication and exchange and reuse of collection object-related multimedia content, and scientific domain knowledge through digital tools, and services and formats for community building and information exchange in the respective sector through, for example, an innovation network. So, new partners, new infrastructures, new ideas. What are new ways of making use of natural history collection? Now I would like to give you a selection, or show you a selection of co-created prototypes and products which we have built over the last 3 years. And all of our projects and initiatives, events, and success stories and the Mediasphere blog can be also found on the Mediasphere for Nature website. I included the links in the presentation, and this is also now available in English for you. My first example is the animal beatbox. The animal beatbox offers its users the possibility to create their own composition in a creative and self-determined way from almost 50 animal voice samples distributed on 4 soundtracks. The voice samples originate from the Animal Sound Archive of the Museum für Naturkunde Berlin. It was created in the context of the Coding Da Vinci East Hackathon in 2018 and supported by the Mediasphere for Nature team. The Barrier-Free Crocodile, an exhibit for the sense. In collaboration with the Mediasphere for Nature team and a small SME, Werk 5, an original specimen of a saltwater crocodile from the collection of the Museum für Naturkunde was digitized by 3D scanning. A full-size 3D model was created that can not only be admired visually, but can also be explored through our senses of hearing and touching. The interactive virtual reality experience inside Tumukumaku, created by the Interactive Media Foundation and Film Tank, takes you to a clearing in the middle of the endangered nature reserve in northwest Brazil, Tumukumaku. As soon as you put on your headset, you dive deep into the ecosystem of the Amazonas rainforest and discover it with all its facets. A varied environment with over 7,500 plant species, closely coordinated with experts from the Museum für Naturkunde, allow users to discover the journey as a human being or as one of the animals living in the rainforest. With the help of a specially developed app, Vogelfinder or Bird Finder in English, you can discover the historical bird collection hall at the Museum für Naturkunde on your own. You are handed a mobile device and a pair of headphones and walk through the many corridors of the hall. You follow the bird songs that guide you to each of the 12 stations where you can discover the story of each particular bird. I hope you find the given example a little bit inspiring and appropriate to demonstrate the new possibilities that arise from close collaboration with the creative sector. But what's next? The success of the Mediasphere for Nature lab and other similar initiatives in Germany demonstrate the need by the culture and creative industry for an infrastructure providing a focal access point for transferring content and knowledge originating from museums. In return, climate institutions are rewarded with an influx of highly creative and innovative ideas. They benefit from well-established partner networks and gain new impulses for their own research. This makes a strong case to develop a transferable model for such a media application lab for other research museums and climate institutions outside the context of natural sciences, for example, technical and historical museums. Our vision is that the development of a transferable model will help to increase the number of media applications lab in Germany and beyond. And we aim at fostering a new kind of lab where research, museum, and GLAM institutions work together with local small and medium-sized enterprises in the culture and creative industry sector, guided by our previous obtained experiences through, for example, Mediasphere for Nature, and profound recommendations. The growing community of practitioners will then allow for even more exchange and thus strengthen the existing initiatives at the applicants' institutions. And so we're currently trying to get some further funding to develop this transferable model further. Based on the lesson learned through our new collaborations, we are actually now better set to identify the user's needs, also in terms of collection digitization, how to do this for best possible reuse. So we are starting a massive digitization project at the Museum für Naturkunde, and so we want to know more about the user's perspective. So we ran a series of so-called inspiration workshops to get in touch with different user groups from the education sector, biomedicine, cultural and creative sector, and bionics. We collected their input, and actually we will consider the possibility, the possible reuse scenarios for those so far fairly underrepresented user groups of our collection in our future digitization program. It is planned to publish a summary of all the obtained and nicely illustrated results, and we also plan to rerun this workshop series in the close future.
You're at about 12 minutes.
Yeah. So I hope I was able to briefly introduce you to the idea of a media application lab at natural history institutions. Feel free to browse our website for further information or contact my team and me directly. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much, Jana. Some of the comments were, this is just like Disney and fantastic engagement opportunities. So the audience is really, really appreciating your efforts. Do we have any questions for Jana? You've stunned them to silence. You've answered everything right up front. Fantastic talk, great activities, great innovation. And people have been putting in links for you to point to various things. Great, really great. Oh, Debbie, good, thank you. And Paul asked, she always comes through. Good old Deb. Love you, Deb. Where is it? How do you suggest getting started to collaborate with this sector?
Well, first of all, maybe it makes sense to share how we started with that. So we actually started with those companies that we already kind of had some relationship with through a contractor relationship or customer contractor relationship, and started out with those and just invited them outside of this kind of contracting relationship and talked to them. And then it was basically word by mouth. And once actually other businesses learned that you are open to this and you want to talk and discuss future collaborations on a more like the same level collaboration, they actually do come by themselves. It's fairly interesting.
All right, Shaban Leachman asks, when people reuse your media, how do you find out what they are doing with it? Is it always collaborative?
Sometimes you have means to find out whether how they use your content. Sometimes you just simply don't. It depends on how you make it available, what kind of licensing framework you use. If you are very open, as we are in many cases, sometimes you just learn by accident or coincidence what they've done. Sometimes, most of the times actually, the companies come to us and talk to us because they want to learn more. So they want to know more specifics. And if it's really like a very close collaboration anyways, they need more information than what you just provide based on images or 3D files. So I would say that most of the time we learn by direct contact what they do. They don't ask for permission if we announce the right licensing framework. Yeah, but sometimes actually by really just people tell us, oh, the content has been used, and it has never been a bad experience for us so far, what the creative sector has done with our content.
Okay, Julie Shapiro asks, how did you determine the sectors that you felt were underused?
Good question. I think we just started based off the experiences. We invited openly, and from there you just go one step further and one step further. So actually by the companies, also the businesses that come in and requests to our curators many times, we learn that there are that there's an interest at least in the collection, and from there we kind of can go further into the different directions. So that is it's not random, but it's almost random sometimes. I mean, it's as open as it can be. You want to know who's interested in collections, so you kind of seek for the context that you kind of gather through people come to you or word of mouth, what people are interested in. Sometimes you just have to go to other like conferences, other domains, and talk to them, and then learn more about what they can use.
Cindy Opitz is asking, can you share a link to the snail image maker? There seems to be a few people eager to.
Yeah, I have it in my presentation. I can, if you go to our website, there's definitely a link to that on the Mediasphere. Yeah, thank you. Good. Falco is there, I see. People working, yeah. Great.
Okay. Let's see. Juliana Cardona Duque, sorry, I probably mispronounced that. How can small Latin American collections co-build with your institution in such a way to share their biodiversity information?
So the question is how Latin American institutions can share their content as well. I mean,
yes.
I mean, for our initiatives, I have to explain that maybe a little bit more. It's more about finding local partners in terms of finding local companies that want to work with us. So we do, that's a very local approach that's kind of widened. If you want to share your biodiversity data, of course, that's way better to use initiatives like GBIF and others to share the data there. If you're interested to collaborate with other businesses, I would actually recommend to try to find businesses in your local area that work in the creative and cultural sector. And sometimes we don't think they're there. I think they're there everywhere, and they're very innovative kind of companies, even in smaller countries. But using the larger portals like GBIF and others as a first step, or creating own solutions, which is sometimes not as good, especially if you have limited funding. As soon as you get your data out, it's going to be taken up. In Europe, we have a very comfortable situation with Europeana, which is a huge aggregator for cultural heritage multimedia content, and it's actually targeted to the creative sector. I don't know about other initiatives in other countries, but this is so far, to my understanding, very regional in terms of continent regional. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the link.
Shaban Leachman's asking, is there a revenue sharing mechanism if the collaborator makes a profit from the reuse of the collections?
We have been heavily working on that. Our first step was to assess what does it cost us to collaborate with companies? What do we have invest, mostly in terms of personnel? That's always the most important factor. We have tried actually selling a poster, a beetle poster that was composed by a designer, and beetles kind of arranged by color. Very nice poster, and it was sold in our museum shop, and he got some cut of it, and we did through the licenses or the fees that we get from the shop itself. So there are some models that we explored. If you want to hear my personal opinion, if it's a smaller company, if we talk about smaller like startups and SMEs, the benefit comes from the innovation rather than the revenue in terms of money. If you come to larger or work with larger companies, actually it's a different setting, and you can actually really ask for money for the services. So we're actually currently working on creating like prices for services that we want to offer.
Perfect. All right. Excuse me. All right, we're down to the last question, and that is from Melissa Murray. Well, it's actually two parts of the question. What kind of infrastructure or hardware software is required, and is the content open access?
So answering the second question first, yes, the content is mostly open access, unless we have not been able to make it publicly available yet. So it ranges from public domain to CC BY when you use the Creative Commons licenses. Technology, well, you need a way to, the partners usually, the first question is, what do you have? We want to know what you have. And so you need a way to show them what your content is and what is available. So that requires either an own like media portal and the respective infrastructure, like a media repository of sort, or you use other portals or infrastructures like Europeana. We also have been able to purchase a lot of equipment like VR equipment, augmented reality equipment, and very powerful computers for pattern recognition, algorithm calculations, and things like that. That is high end, I would say, and we got the money to do that. But I think most of the time the partners also do bring their own equipment. And so most of the time it's you provide media content and your knowledge, and that's what they want from you. So the very kind of first step is not requiring so much of technology rather than a sophisticated data management system.
Thank you so very much for being our very last speaker in this session. A wonderful presentation. Thank you to all of our speakers today. It's even though these talks are all sort of randomly put together in a very random way, actually, making it a very mixed collection, they all came together and made for a very fascinating series of talks. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to Sean. Sean, do you want to turn on your video and give everyone a wave? He was in the background driving some of the machinery. And then thank you also to all of my SPNH co-hosts who've been helping in the background there.